Gastfreundschaft, das ist etwas, das man diesen Leuten nicht beibringen kann. Das erfordert eine gewisse Klasse.
Entschuldigen Sie bitte, mein Herr, aber ich glaube, Sie meinten Gastfreundschaft.
The $500 bottle of Riesling sweated against the white tablecloth, condensation pooling like tiny diamonds under the amber glow of the chandeliers. Angela Durden moved through the gold lounge with the kind of grace that contradicted everything about her, the slight coffee stain on her burgundy blouse, the weight of exhaustion behind her steady gaze, the way her fingers gripped the silver tray just a fraction too tight. She was a queen in exile, and no one in this glass tower knew it. Charles Medlin didn't even look up when she approached table 7. He was too busy performing, leaning back in his chair, one arm draped possessively across the velvet booth, the other gesturing wildly as rapid-fire German spilled from his lips. His fiancée, Jasmine, giggled on cue, her manicured hand covering her mouth in mock shock. Angela set down their appetizers without a word, her face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. But inside, something ancient and sharp was uncoiling. Charles thought he was speaking in code. He didn't realize he was handing Angela the matches to burn his entire world to the ground. Angela's alarm screamed at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to. She'd learned not to hit snooze. In her studio apartment in Queens, the kind where the refrigerator hummed loud enough to drown out the neighbors' arguments, every minute counted. She showered in under 5 minutes, letting the lukewarm water wash away the previous night's aches. Her uniform hung on the back of the bathroom door, freshly pressed despite the hour. The burgundy blouse, black slacks, sensible shoes that cost more than her weekly grocery budget because cheap shoes meant damaged feet, and damaged feet meant missed shifts. Her mother had taught her that, back when her mother still had a voice that wasn't filtered through prison phone static. The subway ride to Manhattan took 43 minutes. Angela spent them the same way she always did, with a letter from her sister, Naomi, smoothed flat across her lap. This one had arrived 3 days ago, the envelope decorated with hand-drawn flowers in the margins, Naomi's way of making international postage feel less like a financial wound. Angie, the biology program accepted me. Can you believe it? Professor Okonkwo says I have a real gift for molecular research. The tuition deposit is due by the end of the month, $8,000. I know it's a lot. I know you're already doing everything. Mama says I should wait, maybe take a year off. But Angie, if I wait, I'll lose the scholarship. This is my one chance. The rest of the letter blurred. Angela had read it so many times she'd memorized the way Naomi's handwriting slanted left when she was excited, the small smudge of ink where her pen had hesitated before writing that number. $8,000. It might as well have been $8 million. Angela folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her purse, next to the other for letters she carried everywhere. Evidence. Proof that this mattered. That the way her feet screamed by hour 6 of her shift mattered. That the condescending smiles and wandering hands and pocket change tips left on $20,000 dinner bills all mattered because Naomi's future was on the other side of them. The Gold Lounge didn't open until 11, but Angela had learned to arrive by 9. Early enough to help with prep work that wasn't technically her job, which meant Miguel in the kitchen saved her the best section, and Sasha at the host stand steered the good tippers her way. Survival in this industry wasn't about talent. It was about alliances built on shared exhaustion and the unspoken understanding that all of them were one bad shift away from financial collapse. You look tired, Sasha said when Angela pushed through the staff entrance, not unkindly. Sasha was 53 and had been working doubles since her husband's construction accident left him with a spine held together by titanium and prayers. I'm fine. Angela smiled the smile she'd perfected over 6 months of this, bright enough to seem genuine, shallow enough to prevent follow-up questions. The morning blurred into the familiar choreography of survival. Polishing wine glasses until they caught light like prisms. Memorizing the day's specials and their pretentious descriptions, seared Hudson Valley duck breast with cherry gastrique and microgreens. As if calling it duck with cherry sauce would somehow justify the $78 price tag. Tying her apron strings tight enough to feel like armor. Her phone buzzed at 10:23 a.m. A text from the money transfer service. Payment of $645 sent to Naomi Durden. Current balance, $127.83. Angela stared at the numbers until they stopped making sense. She'd done the math last night, lying in bed with her calculator app glowing in the dark. After rent, utilities, her own groceries reduced to rice and eggs, and whatever Miguel snuck her from the kitchen. She could send 600 this month. The extra 45 was stupid, reckless, the kind of decision her father would have called leading with your heart when you should be thinking with your head. But her father was dead, executed in a prison yard 7,000 miles away for the crime of being on the wrong side of a coup. And Naomi's tuition deadline was 23 days away, and Angela was still 5,000 short, and leading with her heart was all she had left. The lunch shift started slow. A few businessmen who barely looked up from their phones, a couple celebrating an anniversary who left 18% exactly, calculated to the penny. Angela smiled and performed and swallowed the exhaustion that sat in her throat like ground glass. The tip jar in the break room was a cruel joke, a crystal vase someone had donated, too expensive to throw away, too gaudy to display. Angela emptied her pockets into it at the end of lunch service. $73 in cash, crumpled and damp from being clutched in too many hands. She smoothed each bill flat before adding it to the growing stack in her locker, organizing them by denomination like her father used to do with his diplomatic per diem. Back home, he'd spoken 7 languages fluently. He'd negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements, had shaken hands with presidents and kings. Angela had inherited his gift for languages and his steadfast sense of dignity. She'd learned early that dignity didn't pay rent, but it was the only inheritance the coup hadn't managed to steal. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Naomi, a photo this time. Her sister in a borrowed lab coat, grinning behind safety goggles, surrounded by test tubes and possibilities. First day of advanced lab orientation. I'm doing this for both of us, Angie. For Mama and Papa too. I won't let you down. Angela's chest tightened. She typed back quickly before the dinner rush started. You could never let me down. I'm so proud of you. She didn't add what she was thinking, that Naomi's success was the only thing keeping her upright. The only reason she could smile at men who looked through her like she was decorative furniture. The only thing that made the weight of this borrowed life bearable. The evening shift started at 5. Angela checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusted her name tag, and stepped back onto the floor. The gold lounge was filling up now, the sunset painting the glass walls in shades of amber and gold that made everything look more expensive than it was. Table 7 was a new reservation. High profile, Sasha had warned. Big spender. The kind of customer who could make or break your month. Angela straightened her shoulders, picked up her order pad, and walked toward her future, not knowing it was about to shatter and rebuild itself in the space of a single dinner service. Charles Medlin arrived at table 7 the way men like him always did, as if the world had been specifically arranged for his convenience, and found wanting. He moved through the gold lounge with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never been told no, his hand pressed possessively against the small of his date's back, steering her like she was an acquisition rather than a person. Angela recognized the type immediately. 6 months in high-end service had taught her to read men in the first 30 seconds. The too loud laugh. The way his eyes swept the room, not to admire but to calculate who was watching him, who was worth impressing, who was beneath his notice. His suit was custom-tailored, probably Brioni, the kind that cost more than 3 months of her rent. His watch caught the amber light from the sunset, a Patek Philippe that she knew, because her father had owned one once, ran about $80,000. The woman with him was stunning in that calculated way that required effort to appear effortless. Jasmine Kirk, according to the reservation notes, Sasha had whispered a social media influencer, though Angela wasn't sure what exactly she influenced beyond aspirational dissatisfaction. Her dress was champagne-colored silk, her jewelry deliberate, her smile the kind that had been practiced in 1,000 bathroom mirrors. Angela approached the table with her order pad and her service smile, the one that engaged only the necessary muscles. Good evening. Welcome to the Gold Lounge. My name is Angela, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Charles didn't look up. He was busy arranging himself, the phone positioned just so on the table, angled to catch the sunset through the glass walls. His posture relaxed but strategic, one arm draped across the booth's velvet back. Jasmine at least offered a brief smile, the kind that acknowledged Angela's humanity for exactly half a second before dismissing it. We'll start with the Riesling, Charles said, finally glancing up. His eyes traveled over Angela with the casual assessment of someone evaluating furniture present, functional, unremarkable. The 2019 Schloss Johannesburg. And we'll need menus, obviously. Obviously. As if Angela had approached their table for reasons other than service. Of course. I'll bring those right out. She turned to leave, but Charles's voice followed her, German sliding off his tongue like oil on water. Gott, haben Sie gesehen, wie langsam sie sich bewegt? Für was wir hier bezahlen. Connie man when Nixon's Competeni's personal erwerten. God, did you see how slowly she moves? For what we're paying here, you'd think they could at least hire competent staff. Angela's spine stiffened for only a fraction of a second, invisible to anyone not watching closely. She kept walking, her stride unchanged, her face a perfect mask. Behind her, Jasmine's giggle punctuated the air like breaking glass. In the service station, Angela's hands were steady as she retrieved the wine from the temperature-controlled cabinet. She'd heard worse, in more languages, from better men. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't about never being insulted, it was about never letting your insulter see the wound. But still, German, her father's favorite language, the one he'd spoken with his mentor at the embassy in Berlin. The language of Goethe and Schiller, which Charles was wielding like a blunt instrument. She returned to table 7 with the wine, presenting the bottle with the ritual precision that high-end service demanded. Charles barely glanced at the label before waving his hand dismissively. Yes, that's fine. Pour. Angela opened the bottle, the cork releasing with a whisper. She poured the standard taste into Charles's glass. He swirled it with exaggerated expertise, sniffed, sipped, and nodded his approval as if he'd done something impressive. As she poured Jasmine's glass, Charles leaned forward, his voice lowering to what he clearly believed was a confidential volume. Sie ist wahrscheinlich nur zur Decoration hier. Seien Sie, wie sie versucht, anspruchsvoll zu wirken? Dies Verstehen nicht, das Dienst an Kunst ist. Sie sind nur Ornament. She's probably just here for decoration. See how she tries to look sophisticated? These people don't understand that service is an art. They're just ornaments. These people. Angela's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the wine bottle. She finished pouring, set the bottle in the ice bucket with deliberate care, and asked in perfect, neutral English, "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes with the menu?" Charles finally looked at her directly, something shifting in his expression, amusement, perhaps, or the particular satisfaction of someone who believed they'd gotten away with something clever. "Ein paar Minuten nach. Und bringen Sie uns Brot. Gutes Brot, nicht Dyson billigen Kram. A few more minutes. And bring us bread. Good bread, not that cheap stuff." Except he'd used the wrong conjugation for bring and C was correct, but his casual UNS placement revealed someone who'd learned German in business school, not in life. Someone who knew enough to insult, but not enough to understand the architecture of the language itself. Jasmine was recording now, her phone angled to capture Charles against the sunset backdrop. "Baby, say something else in German. It's so sexy when you speak other languages." Charles obliged, warming to his performance. "Sie verstet kein Wort. Ich kann nicht sagen, dass perform billig React und ihr schu abgenut sind. Und es word einfach weiter lächeln." She doesn't understand a word. I could say that her perfume smells cheap and her shoes are worn out, and she'd just keep smiling. He was right about the shoes. The perfume, a gift from Naomi last Christmas, carefully rationed to last, was actually Chanel No. 5, purchased before the coup, before everything fell apart. But Angela didn't correct him. Not yet. She collected their menus instead, her movements fluid and practiced. "I'll bring the bread selection right away. Our chef prepared a particularly nice sourdough this evening." As she walked away, Charles's laughter followed her, Jasmine joining in with that crystalline giggle that spoke of a woman who'd learned early that agreement was easier than opposition. In the kitchen, Miguel looked up from his station. "You okay?" "Perfect," Angela said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was thinking about timing, about the perfect moment, about the fact that Charles Medlin had just handed her something more valuable than any tip, the certainty of his own superiority, which meant he'd never see her coming. She loaded the bread basket with care, selecting the best pieces, the ones that would make this meal memorable. After all, she'd learned from her father that the most effective response to contempt wasn't anger. It was precision. Angela served their dinner with the kind of meticulous attention that bordered on invisible. The seared duck breast arrived at precisely the right temperature, arranged with the microgreens fanned just so. The cherry gastrique pulled artfully at the plate's edge. She refilled water glasses before they were empty, cleared courses with silent efficiency, and smiled that professional smile that revealed nothing. Charles continued his performance throughout the meal, switching between English for Jasmine's benefit and German for his own amusement. Each comment more cutting than the last, each one delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never been held accountable. Sagen Sie, wie es den Teller halt? Kein richtig Ausbildung. Wahrscheinlich hat sie das in einem YouTube-Video gelernt. Look at how she holds the plate. No proper training. She probably learned that from a YouTube video. Ich wet. Sie arbeitet hier, while sie nirgendwo anders genommen wird. I bet she works here because she can't get hired anywhere else. Dies Art von Arbeit ist alles, wo sie manch menschenfähig sind. This kind of work is all some people are capable of. Angela absorbed each insult like body blows, her face never changing, her hands never trembling. She'd learned this kind of endurance young, sitting in embassy waiting rooms while her father navigated the delicate politics of international diplomacy. He used to tell her that power wasn't about speaking first, it was about speaking last, when your opponent had exhausted themselves and left all their weaknesses exposed. Jasmine's phone was a constant presence, documenting everything. The food, the sunset, Charles's profile against the amber light. This is going to get amazing engagement, she murmured, scrolling through filters. Continental and sophisticated. My followers eat this stuff up. By the time dessert arrived, a deconstructed Black Forest cake, with cherry foam and dark chocolate soil, Charles had consumed most of the bottle of Riesling in half of a second. His German had grown sloppier, more aggressive, his consonants blurring at the edges. Angela set the dessert plates down with ceremony, describing each element in her professional voice. The cherry foam is infused with kirsch, and the chocolate soil is made from 70% cacao with a touch of sea salt. Can I get you anything else? Charles waved her off without looking up, already arranging his dessert for Jasmine's camera. Endlich sind wir sie los. Die ganz Nacht hat sie mit diesem Gesicht herumgelaufen. Als word sie tatsächlich denken. Finally, we're rid of her. All night she's been walking around with that face like she's actually thinking. Gastfreundschaft, he continued, mangling the word with his Americanized pronunciation, making it sound like Gastfreundschaft instead of the proper Gastfreundschaft. Das ist etwas, das man diesen Leuten nicht beibringen kann. Es erfordert ein gewiss class. Hospitality. That's something you can't teach these people. It requires a certain class. Angela paused. She'd been turning to leave, had already taken 2 steps away from the table. But something in that mispronunciation, the arrogance of butchering a language while using it as a weapon, made her stop. She turned back slowly, deliberately. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of something ancient and refined, each syllable precise as cut glass. Entschuldigen Sie bitte. Mein Herr, aber ich glaub, Sie meinen Gastfreundschaft. Excuse me, sir, but I believe you meant Gastfreundschaft. The restaurant didn't go silent, not exactly. The ambient noise continued, the soft jazz from the speakers, the murmur of other conversations. But at table 7, time seemed to crystallize and shatter. Charles's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Jasmine's phone dipped slightly, her carefully maintained smile flickering with confusion. Angela continued, her German flowing like water over stone, aristocratic and unhurried. Die korrekt Aussprache ist etwas nuancierter, als ces dargestellt haben. Und wenn wir schon bei Korrekturen sind bringen uns ist grammatikalisch korrekt, aber uns als Dativobjekt soll vor dem Akkusativobjekt stehen, wenn beide Pronomen sind. Manwort sagen bringen uns das, Brot oder einfach, bringen uns ihre Konstruktion datet auf ein B1 Sprachniveau hin, vielleicht B2 in einem guten Tag. The correct pronunciation is somewhat more nuanced than you present it. And while we're making corrections, bringing CUNS is grammatically correct, but UNS as a dative object should precede the accusative object when both are pronouns. One would say bring us the bread, or simply bring it to us. Your construction suggests a B1 language level, perhaps B2 on a good day. She let that sink in for precisely 3 seconds before continuing, her tone never losing its professional courtesy. Außerdem ist Ornament der Nominative Plural. Im Kontext führen Aussage hatten sie den Nominative Singular oder den Accusative verwenden sollen, je nachdem, was sie ausdrücken versuchten. Und dies nun, das ist grammatikalisch einwandfrei, aber stylistisch wäret es ein Gewiss. Wie haben sie es ausdrückt? Mängel in Class. Additionally, ornament is the nominative plural. In the context of your earlier statement, you should have used the nominative singular or the accusative, depending on what you were trying to express. And dies lit well, that's grammatically sound, but stylistically it betrays a certain, how did you put it? Lack of class. Charles's face had gone through several colors: confusion, then recognition, then a red that started at his collar and climbed to his hairline. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Was Zoom what the? Angela smiled then, the same professional smile she'd worn all evening, but with something sharper underneath. Ihr Ausbreak von Gastfreundschaft war besonders interessant. Sie haben es ausgesprochen wie jemand, der Wirtschaftsdeutsch in einer amerikanischen Business School gelernt hat, technisch funktional, aber ohne die musikalische Qualität der Sprache. Mein Vater pflegt zu sagen, dass man die Warbildung eines Menschen nicht deren misst, wie viel Sprachen spricht, sondern wie respektvoll sie behandelt. Your pronunciation of Gastfreundschaft was particularly interesting. You pronounced it like someone who learned business German at an American business school, technically functional, but without the musical quality of the language. My father used to say that a person's true education is measured not by how many languages they speak, but by how respectfully they treat them. She paused, letting her words settle like sediment in still water. Darf ich Ihnen noch etwas bringen? Vielleicht einen Espresso? Oder ein Wörterbuch? May I bring you anything else? Perhaps an espresso? Or a dictionary? The silence at table 7 was now absolute. Jasmine had stopped recording, her phone lying forgotten on the table. Other diners at nearby tables had begun to notice, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Charles's hand gripped his fork so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangled, barely controlled. Do you have any idea who I am? Angela met his eyes directly, her expression serene. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Medlin. The question is, did you know who I was? Charles's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, the sound cutting through the restaurant's carefully maintained ambience like a knife through silk. His face had gone beyond red into a mottled purple that suggested either rage or a cardiovascular event, possibly both. Jasmine, did you hear that? His voice pitched loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables, deliberate in its projection. Did everyone hear that? Jasmine looked up at him with wide eyes, her influencer's instinct for drama warring with genuine confusion. Baby what? This waitress, Charles jabbed a finger toward Angela, his hand shaking slightly, just insulted you. In English. She used. He paused, recalibrating, his mind working frantically behind his eyes. She used a racial slur. She called you. I did no such thing, Angela said quietly, but her voice carried its own weight. She kept her hands loose at her sides, her posture straight but not aggressive. Every eye in the restaurant was turning toward them now, conversations dying like dominoes falling in sequence. Charles was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling beneath his expensive suit. The wine had given his movements a loose, unpredictable quality, but his eyes were calculating. He was a man watching his social capital evaporate in real time, and he was doing what cornered animals always did, attacking. Don't play innocent. He swept his arm across the table, and whether it was intentional or simply the graceless gesture of someone who'd lost control of his own body, his hand connected with Jasmine's wine glass. It tumbled in what felt like slow motion, red wine arcing through the air like blood, before shattering against the marble floor with a sound that made everyone in the restaurant flinch. The crash seemed to give Charles permission to escalate. He grabbed his own glass and hurled it after the first, then the water glasses, the entire bottle of Riesling still in its ice bucket. Glass and ice and liquid exploded across the floor in a spreading pool of destruction. Jasmine screamed, scrambling backward in her chair, her champagne dress splattered with wine. You think you're smart? Charles was shouting now, fully committed to his performance. You think you can disrespect my fiancée in her own language and get away with it? I heard what you said. Everyone heard it. But nobody had heard anything except German Angela's precise, aristocratic German and Charles's increasingly desperate English. The other diners were standing now, some moving away from the chaos, others pulling out phones to record. Miguel had burst through the kitchen doors, his chef's whites stark against the amber lighting. Angela hadn't moved. She stood perfectly still in the spreading pool of wine and broken glass, her shoes soaked, her uniform splattered, but her face remained composed. It was the stillness of someone who'd watched coups unfold, who'd seen powerful men destroy themselves with their own hands. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through his rage with surgical precision, "you're upset because I corrected your German grammar. That's all that happened here. You spent the evening insulting me in a language you assumed I didn't understand, and when I responded in kind." "Liar." Charles lurched forward, and for a moment Angela thought he might actually strike her. Miguel moved instinctively, positioning himself between them, but Charles caught himself, his survival instincts finally piercing through the alcohol and humiliation. Hitting a woman in a room full of witnesses and cameras would end him permanently. Instead, he pivoted, turning to address the crowd that had gathered. "I want everyone here to know what kind of establishment this is. This woman, this staff member, used abusive, racist language toward my fiancé. She targeted her because of her appearance, made disgusting comments that I won't repeat, and when I called her out on it, she's trying to gaslight me." "That's not what happened," Jasmine said suddenly, her voice small but audible. She was staring at Charles with something new in her expression, doubt, maybe, or the first stirrings of recognition. "Charles," she was speaking German. "I don't even speak German." She switched to English specifically to insult you. Charles shot back without missing a beat. "Ask anyone. Ask her." He spun back to Angela, his finger jabbing the air between them. "Tell them what you said. Tell them what you called her." Angela's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was the moment, she realized, where everything could collapse. Where her word, a waitress's word, a black woman's word, an immigrant's word would be weighed against his. A tech mogul, a man in an $80,000 watch, a man who knew exactly which levers to pull in America's machinery of doubt and racial anxiety. "I told you," Angela said carefully, "that your pronunciation of Gastfreundschaft was incorrect. I pointed out several grammatical errors in your German. That is the entirety of what happened here." "Bullshit." Charles kicked at the broken glass, sending shards skittering across the floor. "I want her fired. I want her blacklisted. I want a written apology and a commitment from this restaurant that they'll implement proper cultural sensitivity training for their staff." He was building momentum now, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone used to boardrooms and negotiations. "And if I don't get it, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of discrimination is tolerated here. My lawyers will." "Your lawyers will do what, exactly?" The voice came from the back of the restaurant, near the private dining rooms, and it carried the kind of authority that made everyone, Charles included, stop and turn. Klaus von Steiner moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through water, people parting instinctively before him. He was in his late 60s, tall and straight-backed, his silver hair immaculate, his suit custom-tailored in a way that made Charles's look off the rack. But it was his face that stopped Angela's breath in her chest, not because she'd met him before, but because she'd seen his photograph 1,000 times. In her father's office, in the old embassy. A younger version of this man, shaking her father's hand, gratitude written in every line of his expression. "Mr. Medlin," Klaus said, his German accent precise and unmistakable, "I believe you were about to threaten legal action against my establishment?" Charles's confidence flickered. "You're the owner?" "I am." Klaus's eyes moved past Charles to Angela, and something shifted in his expression: recognition, sorrow, and something that looked almost like reverence. "And I believe you owe this woman an apology you will never be capable of giving." Klaus von Steiner stood in the wreckage of Table 7 like a man surveying a battlefield where the casualties were pride and pretension. His eyes moved methodically from the shattered glass to Charles's flushed face to Angela's composed stillness, taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading the subtext of human interactions. "Mr. Medlin," Klaus said again, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume. "Before you continue making accusations that will destroy what remains of your reputation, perhaps you should know who you've been insulting for the past 2 hours." Charles's mouth opened, but Klaus raised a hand, silencing him with nothing more than a gesture. This woman standing before you, this waitress you've called incompetent, ornamental, incapable, is Angela Durden, daughter of Ambassador Samuel Durden of the Democratic Republic of Lamera. Klaus's accent shaped each word with careful reverence. A man who, in 1987, granted emergency asylum to my family when we fled East Germany with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a suitcase full of fear. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the jazz had stopped, someone in the back having had the presence of mind to cut the music. Angela felt her breath catch in her throat, her carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. Klaus turned to face her directly, and his eyes were bright with something that looked like unshed tears. I was 17 when your father signed those papers. My sister was 12. Our parents had been blacklisted. Your father risked his career, his posting, possibly his life, to process our asylum request in 48 hours instead of the standard 6 months. He called in every favor he had. He personally vouched for my father's political asylum claim. Herr von Steiner, Angela said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Klaus's voice was firm. Because this man has spent his evening treating you like you were beneath his notice, and everyone in this room needs to understand the grotesque irony of that. He turned back to Charles, whose face had gone from purple to ash gray. Your German, Mr. Medlin, which you wielded like a weapon against Miss Durden, is what we call Gesellschaftsdeutsch business German. Functional, but artless. The German Miss Durden speaks is Hochdeutsch, High German, the language of diplomacy and culture. She was raised in embassies across Europe. She's fluent in 7 languages, has a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown, and spent 3 years working as a translator for the UN before her country's government collapsed in a military coup. Angela closed her eyes briefly. She'd worked so hard to keep these two worlds separate, the life she'd had and the life she was surviving. Having them collide in front of strangers felt like being stripped naked under fluorescent lights. Her father, Klaus continued, his voice hardening, was executed by the new regime for the crime of being loyal to democracy. Her mother is serving a 15-year sentence in a political prison. And Miss Durden is here, working doubles at my restaurant, because she's trying to pay for her younger sister's university tuition, a sister who, unlike you, Mr. Medlin, actually earned her place through merit rather than inheritance. Jasmine had her hand over her mouth, her perfectly manicured nails pressing into her cheek. Several of the other diners were crying openly. Miguel stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, looking at Angela with an expression she couldn't quite read. Charles seemed to be trying to recalibrate, his PR instincts kicking in. Look, I didn't know if I had known. If you had known, you would have what? Klaus's words cut like a scalpel. Treated her with basic human dignity. That's not how decency works, Mr. Medlin. You don't get to choose who deserves respect based on their biography. This is Charles ran a hand through his hair, and Angela could see the exact moment he decided to try a different tactic. Aggression had failed, so now came contrition, calculated and worthless. I apologize. Sincerely. I had too much to drink. I was showing off. I was being an idiot. If Miss Durden would accept my apology, I'd like to make this right. A generous tip, perhaps, or you will leave, Klaus said flatly. Now, you will pay your bill including the cost of the wine you destroyed and the glassware you shattered. You will never return to any of my establishments. And you will discover, starting tomorrow morning, that the merger your company was negotiating with von Steiner Holdings has been indefinitely postponed due to concerns about cultural competency in your leadership team. The color drained from Charles's face completely. You can't, that's $100 million deal. I can't, and I will. Klaus's expression was carved from granite. I've built my fortune in this country on the principle that character matters more than capital. Your behavior tonight has demonstrated a fundamental lack of both. The deal is dead, Mr. Medlin. Consider it a cheap lesson in the cost of arrogance. Charles looked around wildly, as if searching for allies in the crowd, but every face that met his gaze was cold or disgusted or carefully neutral. Even Jasmine had shifted away from him, creating physical distance between their bodies. This is insane, Charles said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Over some words. Some grammar corrections. This is about you spending 2 hours using a language as a weapon to dehumanize another person, Klaus interrupted. This is about you assuming that because someone serves you food, they're beneath you intellectually. This is about you, when caught, trying to destroy that person's livelihood by fabricating accusations of racism. His voice dropped to something colder than ice. You revealed exactly who you are tonight, Mr. Medlin. I'm simply believing you. Klaus gestured to two security personnel who'd materialized from somewhere in the back. Please escort Mr. Medlin and his guest out. Bill the damages to the credit card on file. As the security guards moved forward, Charles made one last desperate attempt to salvage something. Jasmine, come on. This is ridiculous. You know I didn't mean. Don't, Jasmine said quietly, gathering her purse. She looked at Angela with something complicated in her expression, shame, perhaps, or recognition of her own complicity. I'm sorry, she said, the words barely audible. Then she turned and walked toward the exit on her own, her champagne dress stained with wine, her phone forgotten on the table. Charles had no choice but to follow, flanked by security, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed image in ruins. The other diners parted silently to let them pass, and then they were gone, swallowed by the elevator that would carry them down and out and away from this moment that would follow Charles Medlin for the rest of his life. In the ringing silence that followed, Klaus turned back to Angela. His face had softened, the granite melting into something gentler. Miss Durden, he said quietly, would you do me the honor of joining me in my office? We have much to discuss. Klaus von Steiner's office occupied the top floor of the building, a space that managed to be both austere and warm. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Manhattan's glittering sprawl, but the desk was old wood, scarred with decades of use, and the photographs on the walls were black and white, documenting a history that predated the polished veneer of his current success. Angela sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, still wearing her wine-stained uniform, her hands folded in her lap. Miguel had insisted on coming with her, standing just inside the door like a protective older brother, and Klaus had allowed it without comment. I should have recognized you sooner, Klaus said, settling into his own chair with a weariness that seemed to add years to his frame. You have your father's eyes. That same clarity of vision. He paused, reaching for a photograph on his desk and turning it to face her. This was taken the day we received our asylum papers. Angela leaned forward. The photograph showed a younger Klaus, thin and uncertain, standing between two adults who must have been his parents. And there, in the background, was her father, younger than she'd ever known him, but unmistakably him, his hand extended in a handshake, his smile genuine. I tried to find him, Klaus said quietly. After I heard about the coup. I have resources, contacts in almost every government on Earth. But by the time I understood what had happened, it was he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. 3 days, Angela said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. They arrested him 3 days after the military took control. Show trial. Execution within a month. They wanted to send a message about what happened to diplomats who'd worked with Western governments. Klaus's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, but I have nothing better. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of history pressing down on the room like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Finally, Angela spoke. You didn't need to do that. Downstairs. The merger, your business relationship. Yes, I did. Klaus's voice was firm. And not just because of who your father was, though I would have done it for that reason alone. I did it because what Charles Medlin revealed tonight was a fundamental character flaw that would have poisoned any business relationship eventually. Better to discover it over a dinner table than in a boardroom after millions have been committed. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. May I ask you something impolite? Angela almost smiled. After tonight, I think we're beyond politeness. Why are you working as a waitress? Klaus spread his hands, not unkindly. Your education, your experience, your languages, you should be working for the State Department, the UN, any of 100 think tanks or consulting firms that would hire you in a heartbeat. Angela looked down at her hands, at the calluses that had formed over 6 months of carrying trays and polishing glasses. My country's assets were frozen after the coup. That includes all diplomatic families. I'm classified as a potential security risk because my father was executed rather than simply retiring quietly. No government agency will touch me. I can't even get a security clearance to work as a translator. Most consulting firms won't hire someone without references from their previous employer, and my previous employer was dissolved in a military takeover. She looked up, meeting his eyes. And Naomi's tuition is due in 23 days. I don't have time to fight bureaucracy. I need money now. Klaus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. How much are you short? $5,000. The number felt obscene in this office, with its expensive furniture and its view of Manhattan. $5,000 was probably what Klaus spent on lunch in a week. And after Naomi's tuition is paid, what then? Angela hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Survival required focusing on the immediate crisis, not the next one waiting in the wings. I don't know. Keep working, I suppose. There's always another bill, another deadline. Klaus stood, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was measured, as if he were working through a complex equation. Von Steiner Holdings operates in 43 countries. We have manufacturing facilities in Asia, distribution centers in Europe, emerging markets across Africa and South America. Every day, we navigate the complexities of different languages, different customs, different cultural expectations. And despite employing some of the best minds in international business, we fail at it regularly. We offend partners, misunderstand negotiations, miss opportunities because we don't have someone who truly understands the spaces between cultures. He turned back to face her, and something in his expression reminded Angela achingly of her father, that same look of careful calculation mixed with genuine care. I would like to offer you a position as cultural liaison for Von Steiner Holdings. You would be responsible for advising our executive team on international negotiations, training our staff on cultural competency, and serving as a translator when needed. The position would include a salary of $200,000 annually, full benefits, and a signing bonus that would cover your sister's tuition through her graduation. Angela felt the air leave her lungs. Miguel made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. That's Angela started, then stopped, her mind racing. Why? Because I owe your father a debt I can never fully repay, Klaus said simply. Because you're uniquely qualified for this role. And because watching you handle Charles Medlin tonight showed me exactly the kind of person I want representing my company, someone with grace under pressure, someone who knows when to speak and when to listen, someone who understands that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. Angela's throat felt tight. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Klaus pulled a business card from his desk and handed it to her. Take tonight. Sleep on it. Call me tomorrow with your answer. Angela looked down at the card, heavy stock with embossed lettering. Then she looked up at Klaus, at Miguel grinning like an idiot by the door, at the photograph of her father frozen in time, his hand extended in the kind of help that echoed across decades. I don't need until tomorrow, she said quietly. She stood, still in her wine-stained uniform, and extended her hand. When would you like me to start? Klaus's smile transformed his face, erasing years of careful business reserve. He took her hand in both of his grip warm and firm. How about Monday? That should give you time to quit your waitressing job properly. Angela laughed then, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. Actually, I think I just did. Miguel hooped, no longer trying to maintain professional composure. Klaus reached for his phone, already making calls, setting things in motion. And Angela stood in the center of that office, 43 stories above the city, still smelling of cherry gastrique and broken wine bottles, and felt the weight of 6 months, 6 years, really begin to lift from her shoulders. She pulled out her own phone with shaking hands and texted Naomi, call me when you wake up. I have news. Then she added good news. The best kind. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like a promise. Angela had learned long ago that the world could be cruel, that power could be wielded like a weapon, that dignity was something you had to fight for every single day. But she'd also learned, in the space of one extraordinary evening, that sometimes, not always, not often, but sometimes the arc of the universe bent towards something that looked remarkably like justice. And that was enough. For tonight, it was more than enough. 3 months later, Angela stood in the executive boardroom of Von Steiner Holdings, facilitating a negotiation between German automotive executives and a Japanese manufacturing consortium. She moved seamlessly between languages, German to Japanese to English, not merely translating words, but interpreting the cultural nuances that made the difference between a handshake and a walkout. Klaus watched from the head of the table with quiet satisfaction. His gamble had paid off spectacularly. In 12 weeks, Angela had prevented 2 international incidents, secured 3 major contracts that had been stalling for months, and completely restructured the company's cultural competency training program. Her office, spacious, with its own view of the city, had become a shrine to her dual lives. Naomi's acceptance letter to the advanced biology program hung framed on the wall beside a photograph of their father in his diplomatic dress uniform. On her desk sat the crystal tip jar from the Gold Lounge, now repurposed as a pen holder, a reminder of how far she'd traveled in such a short time. Naomi had flown in for Thanksgiving, spending a week in Angela's new apartment in Brooklyn, a real one-bedroom with a kitchen that didn't hum and a shower with consistent water pressure. They'd cried together over their mother's latest letter from prison, written in the careful script of someone rationing paper and hope. But they'd also laughed, sprawled on Angela's new couch, making plans for the future that felt possible now instead of desperately theoretical. She says the guards let her listen to BBC radio once a week, Naomi had said, reading aloud. She heard about some tech executive who got publicly humiliated for being racist. She says she wonders if karma is finally working properly in the world. Angela had smiled, wondering if her mother would ever know the full story, if she'd recognize her daughter as the waitress who'd brought a powerful man to his knees with nothing but grammar and dignity. Miguel still texted her weekly, usually memes about people who'd escaped the service industry, always signed with "Miss you, but proud of you." The Gold Lounge staff had thrown her a going-away party, pooling their tip money to buy her a leather portfolio embossed with her initials. It sat in her office now, used daily, a testament to the bonds forged in shared exhaustion. As for Charles Medlin, Angela had seen the headlines. His company's stock had plummeted after the merger collapse. 3 board members had resigned. Jasmine had very publicly broken off their engagement in an Instagram post about recognizing red flags that had gone viral, spawning think pieces about performative allyship and the dangers of dating men who treat service workers poorly. Angela felt no particular satisfaction in his downfall. Revenge, she'd discovered, was far less sweet than simply living well. She wrapped up the negotiation with handshakes all around, the Japanese executives bowing respectfully, the Germans offering appreciation in their precise, formal way. As the boardroom emptied, Klaus approached her. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. Angela thought about that, about her father who'd believed that service was the highest calling, whether you were serving peace treaties or dinner plates. About dignity that couldn't be taken, only surrendered. About the long arc of justice that sometimes, miraculously, bent exactly where it should. "I hope so," she said. "I really hope so." To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.